Hello and a very warm welcome to everyone out there listening. I'm glad that you decided to join me as we continue on in our journey through the book of Genesis. We're picking up today where we left off last time in chapter number 11. We'll be looking at the generations of Terah. Our reading is verses 27 to 32. So this is Genesis chapter number 11, verses 27 to 32. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor and Haran. Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in his native land, in Ur of the Chaldeans. Then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Ishkah. But Sarah was barren, she had no children. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife. And they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans, to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran, and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years. Then Terah died in Haran. This is the word of the Lord. In today's study, we're going to be looking at the genealogy of Terah, Abram's father. Now, some of you listening may roll your eyes and sigh at the prospect of looking at yet another toledat. But this one is short, and far more significantly, it contains figures who will go on to play a prominent role in Scripture. So Terah's generation is not just a list of people whose names feature just the once in Scripture. When it comes to the person of Terah, we might describe him as standing at a hinge point in human history. In a very real sense, he bridges the gap between the post-flood generations and the covenant people of God. We see now that God is moving away from working with people in general towards establishing a relationship with a particular people through whom he could work. Terah is also the father of 3 men, whose storylines will continue to have resonance throughout the Old Testament. The same cannot really be said for most of Shem's descendants. For many of the people that were listed in his family line, we know little to nothing. Now clearly they fathered children who impacted the world of their day, and they may well have been powerful and significant people, but as far as historical biblical records go, we have no details. So let us now very briefly review the descendants who flowed from Shem to Abraham. This 10-chain link spans a period of 390 years, using the Masoretic chronology. For each person listed, we are told 3 separate pieces of information. Firstly, we are told how old they are when they fathered their seed son of promise. Secondly, we are informed of how long they lived after the birth of this special son. And finally, we are told that they had other sons and daughters, none of whom are explicitly named until we come to Terah. We begin the list with Shem, the son of Noah. He had his seed son of promise called Arphaxad when he was 100 years old. Arphaxad's special son was named Salah or Shelah. He had him when he was 35. When Salah was 30, he begot Eber. His name, as I told you last week, is the source of the word for the word Hebrew. Eber's seed son of promise was Peleg. He was born when Eber was 35. Peleg's name means divided, and as I told you last week, it probably means that he was alive at the time of the Tower of Babel incident. This, as you will, I'm sure, remember, was when God divided the people by confusing the language. Peleg's seed son came along when he was 30. His name was Ru. Ru in turn had Serug when he was 35. At the age of 30, Serug had Nahor. He was to be Abram's grandfather. When he was 29 years old, Serug fathered Abram's father, Terah. Terah, as I mentioned earlier, would father 3 significant sons. The first of these was Haran. He was born when Terah was 70 years old. Abram came along 60 years later when Terah was 130, and the third son was named Nahor. But today we're turning from the toledat of Shem to consider the generations or the toledat of Terah. Verse 27. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot. We turn our attention now to the toledat of Terah. Terah is the 9th seed son of promise that came from the line of Shem. His great significance in God's redemptive plan comes, of course, from the fact that he was the father of Abram. God, as we mentioned previously, is now shifting his emphasis from humanity as a whole to focus in on one particular family. That will be the family of Abram. We spoke last time about Terah's 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Each of them would go on to play a significant role in the ongoing biblical story. However, Abram, later to be renamed Abraham, is by far the most important. That's why his name is listed first, despite the fact that he was not actually Terah's firstborn son. That was actually Haran, born when Terah was 70 years old. Haran, we are told here, was the father of Lot. This naturally makes Lot Abram's nephew. Now, there is a very important reason why Lot is mentioned at this particular point in the narrative, and I'll explain why that is when we get to the next verse. Now, Lot, I'm sure you would agree, is an interesting biblical figure. He's mentioned 33 times in the Old Testament and 4 times in the New Testament, giving us 37 mentions in total. That now makes him an important biblical figure. To put that into some kind of perspective, the prophet Jonah appears 18 times in the Old and 9 times in the New, giving him 27 total mentions. Lot, as we shall see, will feature in several notable incidents to come. It's fair, I suppose, to say that he did make some poor decisions in life, some of which resulted in tragic outcomes. For example, we might look at what happened when he and Abram quarrelled about the land. Abram came to him and proposed a plan. They should part ways, and Lot was allowed to have the first choice of where to settle. Lot, I'm afraid to say, made a very selfish decision to take the best land that was located near Sodom. He would later live to regret this choice when God destroyed this city, resulting in the loss of all his possessions, and even more significantly, his wife. Shortly after this, we have the incident involving a drunken Lot and his 2 daughters, without doubt one of the Bible's most depraved and deplorable stories. But despite this, we should be aware that the New Testament calls Lot righteous in 2 Peter chapter 2. He's commended for opposing the wickedness that prevailed in the city of Sodom, and it was this righteousness that led God to saving him and his family. So, as I said, he's an interesting character. We'll have lots more to say about Lot as we progress. Well, let's read on. Verse 28. And Haran died before his father Terah in his native land, in Ur of the Chaldeans. Haran, we are told here, died before his father Terah. In some translations this is rendered in the presence of his father. Literally the meaning is that he died in his father's face, whilst his father was still alive. This was an unusual occurrence then, as it still is today. Sadly, at times children do die before their parents, but this is certainly not the norm. Now Moses is recording this particular detail because it's necessary to explain to us Lot's situation. Lot, you see, now finds himself without a father. Abram would act in a fatherly way and take Lot under his wing. But it also meant that Lot had to step into his father's shoes and act as the head of that particular family line. Haran died in the land of his birth, in Ur of the Chaldeans. This was not the place that the family were originally from. Most scholars believe that Terah originally came from the land of Haran and had apparently moved to Ur at some point in his youth. Terah's 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran, were all born in Ur. What do we know about Ur of the Chaldees? Well, let's start with the name. Moses, remember, is writing a long time after these events have transpired. The people to whom he is writing knew that the area of Ur, southern Mesopotamia, was the home of the Chaldean people, hence the name Ur of the Chaldees. In Abram's time it would simply have been called Ur. Ancient Ur was the busy and prosperous capital of the Sumerian people. Clay documents that have been uncovered in the archaeological excavation of Ur paint a picture of an advanced and sophisticated culture. The Royal Cemetery, uncovered by Sir Leonard Woolley between the years 1922 and 1934, revealed opulent tombs filled with artefacts that speak to a society rich in artistry and social hierarchy. Included amongst the stunning finds were an array of golden helmets, crowns and other kinds of jewellery. Excavations have also shown that the city at one time was surrounded by a great city wall that was 8 metres tall and staggering 25 metres wide. Ur was a port city that was located at the point where the Euphrates River runs out into the Persian Gulf. This, as you can imagine, made it an important trade and commercial centre. It was well established and thriving by the time that it's mentioned here in the book of Genesis, though some do believe that the city had reached its zenith and was beginning to decline. Some scholars propose that this is the reason why Terah and his family wanted to leave the city. I'm not sure, though, that we have enough evidence to draw such a conclusion. People often wonder just how populous ancient cities were. When it comes to the city of Ur, archaeologists have made some estimates about the population of the city in and around Abram's time. Their excavations have discovered that there were approximately 20 houses per acre. Assuming the occupancy of each dwelling to be between 6 and 10 people, that would mean there were around 120 to 200 people per acre. The city of Ur covered approximately 150 acres, which using these density levels would mean that it had a population somewhere around the 24,000 mark. We know also that the city was the hub for pagan, wicked practices. Ur was believed to be the home of the moon god Sin, also known as Nanna. In fact, the city's name is derived from the god's name. The city's name literally means the abode or home of Nanna. The main temple to the moon god was a ziggurat that was approximately 30 metres tall. Interestingly, the city of Haran also had the reputation for being a major centre for the worship of Sin. I'll speak more on this subject later, but let's read on. Verses 29 and 30. Then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Ishka. But Sarai was barren, she had no children. Moses now turns his attention to describe a number of complicated relationships within this family. First, Abram married Sarai. Her name means my princess. She was named after Shereit or Sarat. Depending on which of the ancient sources you consult, Sarat was either the queen wife of the moon god Sin or another name for the goddess Ishtar. Ishtar was the Mesopotamian goddess of love, sex, fertility, war and political power. She was worshipped from at least the early 2nd millennium across Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian and Assyrian cultures. Later, as I'm sure you know, God would change Sarai's name to Sarah, which means princess. The name change came as part of the Abrahamic covenant. The Talmud explains the reason why God subtly altered her name. Initially she was a princess only to her nation, my princess, but ultimately she became Sarah, a general term indicating that she was princess for the entire world. Sarai was actually Abram's half-sister. They shared the same father in Terah, but had different mothers. Today, for both ethical and health reasons, we forbid marriage between close family members, and indeed God's law would later impose a prohibition against this. But at this particular time in human history, it seems to have been a common practice, and one that God permitted. Abram's brother Nahor married a woman named Milcah. Her name means queen. This means that Abram married a princess, and Nahor married a queen. Milcah was the daughter of Haran, meaning that Nahor married his niece. Haran was the father of both Milcah and Ishka, making both Milcah and Ishka daughters of Haran, so they were sisters. It also means, of course, that they were sisters of Lot. Milcah seems to have been a prominent and rather well-regarded woman among her extended family. When Abraham was living in Beersheba, long after he'd left the rest of the family in Mesopotamia, he received a report about his distant family members. Milcah is mentioned before Abraham's own brother as becoming the mother of 8 children. We then read a very crucial detail that will go on to play a major role in Abram's story. Sarai was unable to produce children. She was barren. As we shall discover later, God would use this particular dilemma as a test for Abram's faith. The dilemma he faced was as follows. God had promised him that he would be the father of a great nation, and yet here he was with a wife who was barren. Would Abram trust God and have faith, or not? For a woman to be barren in the ancient world was probably the most devastating thing that could befall a wife. It's worth us taking some time to point out at least some of the consequences that a woman living in such a scenario might face. At the very least, a barren wife would be looked down upon and would face considerable social stigma. Women were expected in that culture to produce offspring, especially sons. A wife that was unable to do so would feel considerable shame. She might well be ostracized within the family and disrespected by the wider community. Barren wives also faced the prospect of an unsettled marriage and the security that a marriage would offer a woman in those days. Women who could not produce children risked being set aside, divorced, or even replaced. The husband in question may choose to take on a second wife who could produce an heir and continue the family line. There was also the risk that the husband might consider the use of surrogacy in order to try and obtain an heir. It was socially acceptable at that time to use a servant or concubine for such a task. This would obviously lead to a weakening of the marriage bonds and place the wife in a very difficult situation. And finally, we should not overlook the fact that women who could not produce children faced an uncertain old age. Who would be there to care or provide for them when they were too old to care for themselves? So Sarah then found herself in a desperate predicament. We shall see in due time how hers and Abraham's story plays out. Well, let us continue. Verse 31. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife. And they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. We read here that Terah, along with Abram, Sarai, and Lot, left Ur to travel to the land of Canaan. No reason is given here for them making this momentous decision. It was a considerable undertaking, a journey of about 550 miles from Ur in Mesopotamia to the city of Haran. To give you some idea of that distance, it's about 325 miles from Seoul to Busan. So imagine packing up all of your belongings, throwing them onto the back of a camel, waving goodbye to all of your friends, and walking down to Busan. No thanks, I hear you say. What made them pack up and leave the prosperous and sophisticated city that they had called home for so long? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, it's a vital part of the story. It's important that we all recognise that they did not make this move on a whim. It was not done because they thought there were better opportunities or perhaps job prospects elsewhere. It was done as an act of obedience. Abram, you see, had received a message from God regarding this move. In Acts chapter 7, we'd read the following. And he said, Brethren and fathers, listen. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said to him, Get out of your country and from your relatives, and come to a land that I will show you. Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran. And from there, when his father was dead, he moved him to this land in which you now dwell. That's Acts 7, verses 2 and 4. This account, of course, is taken from Stephen's address to the high priest. He tells us here that the glory of God appeared to Abraham and told him to leave Ur and travel to a land that he would show him. We know this, of course, to be the land of Canaan. So Abram presumably persuaded his father and the other family members to leave and off they went. This means, therefore, that Abram left out of obedience to God. He did not know what awaited them, but he trusted that God would bless them. Now the astute among you will note that they didn't quite reach their destination. We are told that they stopped once they had reached the city of Haran, and they dwelt there. Why Haran? Scholars speculate that perhaps Terah had lived in Haran previously. It was a place with which he was familiar and felt at home. There may, however, be another, rather more sinister reason. Terah, as we established in a previous sermon, was a pagan. He worshipped the moon god Sin. The greatest centre for this in the ancient world was the city of Ur. The second most important place of worship for this god was, you guessed it, Haran. So it's possible that when Terah arrived in Haran, that he felt right at home, religiously speaking. He had come from one city devoted to the worship of Sin, and now he found himself in another. So perhaps he said to Abram and the rest of the family, "Let's settle here. It's comfortable and pleasant." Better yet, they worship the same gods we do. What do we know about ancient Haran? Today the city is located in southeastern Turkey, close to the border with Syria. If you're ever in that region, you can visit and see some impressive remains. In Abram's day, Haran was an important city in ancient Mesopotamia. Its importance was largely due to its location on the main trade route that was running between Babylonia and the Mediterranean. Traders and travellers moving between these two destinations naturally passed through the city, and as a result, it grew to be an important commercial centre. It was located on the Balik River, about 80 miles or so upstream from its confluence with the Euphrates. Excavations that have been carried out at Haran since the 1950s have revealed a city with a long history of occupation. The site spans roughly 100 hectares, with a central tell or hill rising about 20 metres above the plain. In Abram's era, Haran was most likely fortified by a mud brick wall. In the centre of the settlement was a temple complex, dedicated, as I've said before, to the moon god Sin. The temple, which has only to this day been partially excavated, was a steeped structure, most likely a small ziggurat, measuring about 30 metres squared at its base. The city's layout, as has been uncovered, comprised residential quarters, marketplaces and administrative buildings, organised in an organised grid of streets. Houses were constructed of mud brick and had plastered walls. They were surprisingly spacious, typically having between 8 to 12 rooms sited around a central courtyard. This supports the position that Haran was a thriving, prosperous place. All of the archaeological findings support the biblical portrayal of Haran as being a wealthy city. This makes Abraham's departure a significant act of faith, that he left the material comforts of Haran for an uncertain future in Canaan. Let's close today's study with the following verse. Verse 32. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Our passage for today closes by telling us about the death of Abram's father Terah. He died in Haran, aged 205. He enjoyed a long life. He no doubt died with many adventures and experiences under his belt. He had no doubt learned many things during his long life, but he sadly had not learned the most important. Terah tragically died a pagan in a city devoted to the worship of a pagan god. He had never learned to put his faith and trust in the one true God. How tragic and how sobering. We probably all have elderly relatives who have not yet placed their faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. How desperately sad it would be if they died without properly hearing the gospel message. May all of us feel a conviction in this particular area. We all know someone who needs to hear the message of hope that comes only through the person and work of the Lord Jesus Christ. So let us not be shy in sharing him with them. Following his death, Abram would leave Haran and finally make his way to where God wanted him, the land of Canaan. Lord willing, we will look at this subject next week. Lessons to learn. I have drawn 3 lessons from today's study. Number 1. Move away from evil. You probably won't be surprised to learn that the Bible is full of wisdom and advice for leading a righteous life. A major part of this involves doing all that we can to avoid evil. We are called to fear the Lord and to turn away from evil. In some cases, this even includes physically fleeing from the presence of evil. This means that we should be doing all that we can to keep clear of evil places, people, and even ideologies. It's difficult to maintain purity and to be focused on living a life that is pleasing to the Lord when we are immersed in an evil culture. In today's story, we saw that Abraham and his family were living in the city of a city that was wholly given over to wicked pagan practices. We can only imagine the horrors that such worship would have entailed. Later they moved to Haran, which was an equally wicked place. This, of course, wasn't God's plan. God had called Abraham out of and told him to go to the land of Canaan. God knew that this break was necessary. Abraham had to move both physically and spiritually from heathen surroundings so that he could establish a fuller relationship with the Lord. Now we today exist within a world in which evil is ever present. It's impossible to ignore or to avoid. But clearly there are some practical things that we can do to keep away from evil. We should do our best to avoid places that promote ungodly behaviours. Christians, for very obvious reasons, should not be known as people who frequent casinos or strip clubs. But spiritually too, we need to guard our hearts and minds. We need to make a move away from things or activities that God would find displeasing. It's so easy to allow evil images, thoughts and ideas to seep into our minds. Often I'm afraid we are not as discerning as we ought to be. We consume things that draw us away rather than towards the Lord. It's very difficult to give God the time and attention that he deserves and desires when we are caught up in the evils of this world. When we give these things up and move towards God, we can, just like with Abraham, enjoy a fuller, greater relationship with the Lord. So my call to all of us today is to be active and engaged in the very real battle against evil. Let us all be very careful about where we let our minds and thoughts go. Let us all seek to be moving closer to the Lord and away from evil. Number 2. A failure to move. Abraham, later to become Abraham, is rightly recognised as a man who was obedient to God's call. When God spoke, he listened and obeyed. But we also must note that he was only partially obedient. He made a rather sluggish start. God, you see, told him to go to the land of Canaan. But instead of going there directly, he settled or dwelt in Haran. The reason for doing this is not explicitly stated. Perhaps life was good and very comfortable in Haran. Maybe his father liked it there and stubbornly refused to move on. But the truth is that God's blessings lay in the promised land. In order to receive them, it required Abraham to give up the comfort and security that he may have felt in Haran and to step out in faith. To get the good things that God had planned, he had to leave his old life behind. The same is often true for us. God has good things planned for us, but in order for us to receive them, we must give up our old lives and move on. Just like Abraham, we are called to step out in faith and trust in the Lord. Number 3. Learn from Abraham. Abraham, later of course to be Abraham, is widely recognised as being a man of great faith. But we should note that this assessment could only be made later in his life. It was only after years of testing and shaping by God that he became the mighty man of faith. As we saw in our sermon today, and as we shall discover over the next few weeks, he did not quite start off that way. At the point of his call, Abraham's faith, whilst real and genuine, was meagre. He would go on to make many mistakes in his early walk with the Lord. This means that in many ways he was just like you and me. At times we are strong and committed in our faith, and at other times we take a misstep and fall into error. God diligently worked in Abraham to shape, mature, nurture, develop, and transform his character. And thankfully, he's doing the same with us. We, just like Abraham, are special and important to the Lord. He is preparing each one of us for what he has planned. All that is required from us is that we willingly and joyfully submit to him.
Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another,
"Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly."
They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar.
"Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth."
But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the sons of men had built.
Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech.
So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. This is the genealogy of Shem. Shem was 100 years old, and begot Arphaxad, 2 years after the flood. After he begot Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years, and begot sons and daughters. Arphaxad lived 35 years, and begot Salah. After he begot Salah, Arphaxad lived 403 years, and begot sons and daughters. Salah lived 30 years, and begot Eber. After he begot Eber, Salah lived 403 years, and begot sons and daughters. Eber lived 34 years, and begot Peleg. After he begot Peleg, Eber lived 430 years, and begot sons and daughters. Peleg lived 30 years, and begot Reu. After he begot Reu, Peleg lived 209 years, and begot sons and daughters. Reu lived 32 years, and begot Sirach. After he begot Sirach, Reu lived 207 years, and begot sons and daughters. Sirach lived 30 years, and begot Nahor. After he begot Nahor, Sirach lived 200 years, and begot sons and daughters. Nahor lived 29 years, and begot Terah. After he begot Terah, Nahor lived 119 years, and begot sons and daughters. Now Terah lived 70 years, and begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot, and Haran died before his father, Terah, in his native land, in Ur of the Chaldeans. Then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren; she had no child. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law, Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran.